Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the weekly live stream for the Restitutor Orbis channel. I am your valiant and yet despised host, Lucius Aurelian. Thank you for joining me for another live stream, and I'm always enjoying the rather unique status in this particular form of exploration. So we are exploring gargoyles, returning to the symbols of Tartaria. And this is going to be a little bit of a different live stream because I am encouraging and hoping for some interaction on this particular live stream. And the first question that I have for everybody that I would like to see you chime in on, and we'll highlight some of the comments and go over them. What do you think a gargoyle actually is? So, what is a gargoyle? What do we think a gargoyle is, just at first impression? And we've got some imagery here just to sort of put it up in our mind. What's a gargoyle? Oh, thanks, Vaughn. I appreciate that. Philip says it's a griffin. Yes, that's one way to look at a gargoyle. KC933 says a guard. Well, that's an interesting perspective. Hey, New West Reset, good to see you. Dallas says it's a demon or something. Yes, there's certainly a lot of demon icons with a gargoyle. No doubt about it. Anna says it protects. Very true. Kathy goes more direct with an ugly creature. I could certainly agree with that, and we'll be looking at some examples of some ugly creatures. Nana says it's a guardian for the building. Yes, very true. And Robert says a spirit demonic. Oh, all very, very interesting. And one last one I'll highlight before we move on. The Alien Empire says a dragon. And indeed, there are gargoyles that look exactly like dragons. Now, why am I starting this live stream by asking what a gargoyle is? I recall teaching in history class about Middle Ages architecture, and would you be surprised to know that the official definition of a gargoyle is it's actually a grotesque water spout. In other words, it's a functional piece of the Gothic architecture style, or that architecture style that our mainstream historians and scholars agree was primarily active from, the 12th to the 16th century, or the 11th to the 1500s, depending on how you want to say it. But sometime in the distant past, and then it was supplanted by that wonderful Renaissance architecture, although there's a lot of overlap and so forth, and there's always exceptions. Dallas, that explains nothing. Yeah, absolutely, Dallas, you're right. It doesn't. And just wait until we look at some of these. And so, yes, a gargoyle is officially a grotesque waterspout. And here you're seeing some of the sketches of them, and yet there are many different varieties of gargoyle, and we're going to look at them. Now, these are the gargoyles that we tend to be most familiar with. The lonely vigil that looks rather disgusting. It's known as grotesque, and you tend to see it in Gothic cathedrals, but you might be surprised to know it's a lot more common than we realize. Now, what are your thoughts when you see an image like this? And of course, you'll see plenty of them in great old Paris. Doc Shelley says, greetings. Thank you, Doc. Welcome. Sky Sage, looks like Godzilla. Yes, I wonder, were the designers, the original innovators of Godzilla, inspired by the gargoyle? Yeah, I forgot about reading about the history of the development of Godzilla, but that's all right. Ishko says, he always thought the gargoyles are sending some kind of message, but what? Oh, very, very interesting. And Kathy says, demonic dog. Yeah, no doubt about it. Oh, Jamie. Hey, Jamie, good to see you. Reptiloids. That's an interesting perspective. And indeed, we tend to see that a lot as well. Anne says it looks possessed. And indeed, there is something very demonic about them. Now, oddly enough, we were informed again by our architectural historians, and at one point in time, I informed in the past too, so I'm guilty of this, and I'll admit it, confess to all of you that yes, I passed on this information, but I did question it at the time. Gargoyles were employed by the church, the Catholic Church, and other churches as guardians of the buildings. Apparently, they needed these grotesque figures to ward off evil spirits. Ah, yes, another material thing. Now, here you do get the idea that, yes, perhaps this could be a water spout, although oftentimes the fact that they try to explain gargoyles as just being glorified and very fashionable water spouts is, well, it's kind of the explanation you'd expect when we're trying to explain very artistically, divinely inspired architecture from the past. It seems to be the go-to. But I suppose you could say, yeah, it's just going to be a great water spout. I mean, what do our water spouts look like today? Since we're all dealing with weather, especially across the United States, but everywhere. How about the Hounds of Hell, says Creator's Life. Oh, that's a good one too. Oh, Internet Machine, stone by day, warriors by night. We were betrayed by the humans we had sworn to protect. Don't worry, I've got a little reference to that one as well. Michael, Gothic architecture, construction by the Vicar. Ah, yes, of course, of course. Anyways, looking at a couple more. Here we have the dragon gargoyle, or at least an example of it, crawling on the side of a building. Now, for full disclosure, some of the gargoyles we look at are very much gargoyles that I believe were constructed by our civilization. But we're looking at what was inspired from the past, and there's also this continued effort to, how shall we say, blend accounts. Anyways, yeah, I suppose you can see it right here where the water could run down in this little area, but we're going to look at some other examples where gargoyles might not be so clear cut. Here's one of the more interesting images that we have with a couple gargoyles. And so, am I really to think that water would be coming out of the mouth of this gargoyle? Maybe, but then you've got well, that's not actually a gargoyle. It's a grotesque, you see. It's just merely a stylized figure that's to protect the building from evil spirits. Nice little dome in the background, huh? But very, very intriguing, isn't it? Jamie says, one of the strangest out-of-place carvings I ever saw was at a tiny Shinto temple in the guts of Kyoto. All kinds of intriguing things in Kyoto, Jamie. I need to get back to Japan again, too. I am Kairos. Great question. How many were later added? Well, you might recall that one of the most famous examples of gargoyles is with Notre Dame de Paris, the one that was just renovated after the unfortunate fire. Fires. But anyways, did you know that Notre Dame, which was constructed in the distant past originally, from the good old time frame of the 1100s to the 1300s? Yes. Back when we could do things like that in France very, very easily. 1163 to 1345 to be specific. But on the timeline, there was an incredible renovation project that went on from 1844 to 1864. And this is very well documented, not very well photographed, but well documented. A major restoration by a couple French architects, and they added a lot of things in the Gothic style somehow in the 1800s. It's the 1800s. We could do anything that we wanted to. But the odd thing about it, though, and you're asking this question, is this recurring theme with these structures that you have of renovation and always being able to do this, and whatever cathedral or wherever it is. Jamie Griffin says sanctuary. Absolutely right. Oh, this is a good comment here. Mr. Merkabastic, that gargoyle looks wise. Yes, he does have a rather wise look on him, doesn't he? But you look at some of the other ones, and you see some of these designs that you have, and you can certainly get this impression of these terrifying creatures. Yes, always on churches because, churches needed to look terrifying, apparently. Because, if you're terrified, then you're going to submit yourself to, whatever is being stated in the church. At least that's what the saying would go. Now, I'm not saying that's what the church says. I'm merely saying there are certain interested parties that do make that proclamation that that's what the church is saying. If you recall the film In the Name of the Rose, the Venerable Yorgi said that he didn't like people laughing because if people laughed, they weren't afraid. And if they weren't afraid, they wouldn't defer to the authority of God. Not those exact words, but that's the idea. But great film there with Sean Connery and, who was it, Christian Slater. Oh, yeah, back when Christian Slater was getting cast and everything. He did a pretty good job in the film, though. Also had F. Murray Abraham as the villain, the Inquisitor. But you can see here some of the figures and how they're actually captured on this drawing. And of course, the wonderful, potentially cymatic windows that we have in a lot of these structures. And so it gives you the impression that this is just a little bit more than a functional, elaborate water spout, don't you think? Hmm. Hmm. Ah, Sky Sage, yes. Put the fear in you. And there's so many different unique and subtle ways of doing that, whether it's some very terrifying structure or looking at some horrifying mythical fear that we have that's actually brought to life in 3D on a structure. Because why wouldn't you build a terrifying statue, right? After the trip awake, a trophy to scare off evil. Much like the ossuaries, right? Only there we're not displaying gargoyles, we're displaying human remains. Same concept, right? I am Cairo says, did the gargoyles pay coded tribute to the resettlers and controllers? I wonder. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. Right now we're just looking at them and getting an idea for what they may represent. So let's look at some different examples. Now, here we can sort of see the example that, all right, these do look like they're supposed to be water spouts. But again, look at all the effort that would have gone into creating these, and also the time frame that these were created, as early as the mid 1100s all the way to the mid 1500s, and of course some beyond, because they say they renovated certain gargoyles. And yes, we do have an example of another renovation that occurred as late as the 1990s, and that's quite an eye catcher, but we'll get to it. But just think of this at this time when they're going to all this effort, taking these hundreds of years to build these cathedrals, according to the mainstream account, and they decide that they're going to have decorative water spouts like this. Now, there's a couple different explanations that say that gargoyles originally started as lions' heads, and that's what they were in the classical architecture or the Roman Greco architecture, whatever the heck you want to call it. And then it evolved, of course, as things went to Gothic. Well, then we started to transition to the scary monsters. And then as we went to Renaissance, then we transitioned back to humans, or at least people, however you want to say it. But on some structures, you actually have both, like on this one. So imagine the effort this would have taken, and how exactly was this created? Was it sculpted? Was it poured? Was it cast? Not exactly sure. Of course, the impression that we get is everything's carved on the cathedral, but who knows for sure, right? Chassis, sound amplifiers. I don't wonder. And I don't wonder if the water somehow played a role in that as well. What really is a human, asks Creator's Life. Great question. I'm still trying to answer that one myself. Jamie's going to the phonetic roots of the name gargoyle, gahul. There's a couple different roots to it, although they actually relate it to throat and how it translates into English because the water passes through it. Although the actual origin is a little bit more, how shall we say, insidious, and yet it's not something I'm encouraged to talk about. So table that one for another time. Yeah, I know. Oh, the Alien Empire, the Scream. Yes, these terrifying figures, and that's what they tend to represent. They are giving you a really nasty scream. Ishko. Anyway, the effort doesn't match the significance ascribed by the mainstream. They underestimate everything. And they tend to be consistent about that, don't they? Because when you really think about the effort that went into it, you have to ask those kinds of questions. And every single one you see, and these are more of the recent gargoyles, although these could also be attributed to grotesques. We'll look at specific examples of grotesques. And as always, when they try to classify things, there's a lot of overlap, or there's a lot of things that apply to multiple different situations, which again, I find fascinating. And here you see the transition to, maybe we should say, malevolent looking human faces. Yes, we go from lions to dragons to demonic creatures to malevolent looking human faces. Or is it all the same thing? Hard to say. Now, here in Estonia, you have an example of a gargoyle that does actually look more like it was designed to be a spout, and they just put a little dragon decoration on the end of it. And I will admit, this does look like something that would be within the capability expectations of perhaps even the Middle Ages. I'll call it like I see it. I think this is something they could have done in the Middle Ages, although apparently this is a more recent one. But again, who knows for sure? Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I'm merely stating it looks that way. I like the crown on it, though. Very decorative. And of course, it still looks much nicer than the water spouts on my house. But, maybe I'm just having some water spout envy here. Hard to say, right? Oh, yeah. Opie, very cute. Yeah. This is the cute gargoyle. This one isn't terrifying you, is it? Yeah. Not meant to be terrifying, is it? KC933. That was definitely added later. I know. Sometimes I got to make a very obvious example. What's Our Real Story says, water and music is interesting. Saw a piano filled with water. Sounded really cool. And that's a really good call out there, What's Our Real Story, because that's the connection that we may be missing between what we see with the gargoyle and the use of water. If it was water, maybe it was something else that flowed through these so-called gargoyles, or maybe something else entirely. Now, if you go to certain places, whether you're in Belgium, France, or where have you, you do have these examples of these very isolated gargoyles. Now, how do you explain this one? Oh, we just needed one water spout here on this massive structure. And of course, if you look carefully, you can see a lot of detail. We've got many different faces that are very ornate and detailed. And of course, all the symbolism here. No, it's not symbology. But why this one lone gargoyle right here? And it does look like the traditional gargoyle. So is it possible that it really wasn't about just having a water spout, that there was a functional purpose that may elude us or we may not be aware of? What are your thoughts on that? Jamie says for spraying oil. That's an interesting thought. Well, I mean, you could really spray anything out of it, so. Oh, yeah. Sid Vintage, that thing is huge too. Oh, very much so. Not water, tar, says Nate Knight. Yeah, possible. Liquid fire. Sort of like your good old classic Greek fire, right? A variation of that. Alien Empire says a free energy device. Entirely possible. And maybe it was something like that. I mean, think of it as some sort of emanator, if you will. Maybe that's what it was. There you go, villain. Laser. Who knows? And who knows what the limitations were? Opie, dragons breathing fire. And why is there that association? Wonderful, wonderful comments. You see, this is why comments and interaction mean everything on live stream, because other people have these ideas and they share these ideas. And I really enjoy it. Creator's Life, most likely a defensive device. Yes, very likely a defensive device. But on the other hand, if you have that kind of capability, it could potentially be subverted for another purpose, for all we know. Ishko, there's always plenty of malevolent, subtle creatures lurking around, so any kind of defense is welcome, and ugly, scary defenders are more effective. And you got a point there. Definitely have a point on that one. But then we have some other variations of gargoyles. I mean, here we have this very interesting creature with this extreme beak. Now, you might just want to do the hand wave and just say, well, it's some elaborate bird. But is it? You see some interesting variations of creatures when you look closely at gargoyles. They don't tend to be the creatures that you go out and see very easily in nature. Now, that's not to say that they didn't exist at one point in time, but in order just to say it's artistic license, is that what's going on with them? Not really sure. Oh, here we go. Now, this is one of our renovated gargoyles. This was done very recently, and you can see the difference in materials. And I think we all know what eponymous film series this particular gargoyle is from. Yeah, Robert says it. Hybrids. Oh, and we've actually got an example where they call the gargoyles chimeras or hybrids, because why not? That's right. It's the good old xenomorph. Can't go without seeing a little H.R. Giger on this channel. Excuse me, H.R. Geiger. Geiger. I always do that. But why would they do this? Because, again, it's another example of how they are trying to obfuscate the account. Why would anybody allow a historical building to be renovated with something like this? Oh, I just thought it'd be cool to put a xenomorph on one of our old cathedrals, so let's make it happen. It's that easy. I plan to make a mold of a gargoyle, and then I'll make Roman concrete gargoyles. Why not? Because it's an easy thing to do, right? After the trip awake says just stone carvers showing off what they could do. Right. Now, I suspect that this one was made on the ground somewhere, and then they just attached it, probably glued it to the side of the cathedral, but who knows for sure. Casey, I don't like it. Yeah, it does tend to stand out from the others and what they may have represented. Oh, here you go. Sid Vintage says predictive programming. Ah, yes, and a very direct form of predictive programming. Jamie asks, where are the face huggers? That's probably going to be in the next renovations that they do on one of the cathedrals. You know, when we have more unfortunate natural acts that occur, and you know we have to do repairs and renovation. Pinch says renovation means destruction. Yeah, that's probably a good way to look at it. But anyway, enough of this one. Now, I'll leave you with one of the more elaborate series of gargoyles. Now, how exactly do you explain the need for this many gargoyles or this many water spouts? I mean, you would think you'd probably only need one per floor, maybe two max, but right here in this image, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and probably many, many, many more on this building. I'm just counting the ones we can see in this image. And no, I can't count, and feel free to laugh at me. But it's very interesting, though, that you see all the detail and all the variance in these images. We've got creatures, we've got odd humans, and then we've got everything in between. Thoughts on what is being displayed here? Jamie says, give him a good hosing, lads. Yeah, no doubt. KC, carved with chisels. Yeah, how much time would that take if that's what it was? Kathy sums it up very nicely. That's a little overkill. Yeah, I would say so. Villain, pool on the roof overflowing. Yeah, must have been a heck of a pool. Dallas says there must be mucho evil in that part of town. And that's what you really wonder. Is that what it was, or was it representing something else? Chassis says, looks like something got on Medusa's bad side. Yes, she saw how awful that remake of Clash of the Titans was going to be. Okay, sorry, I had to crack one remake joke. Stewie says gargoyles are made after the reptilians. Well, maybe. Maybe. We just don't know. You know, could it be that they actually had a little bit more of a hybrid nature to them? Were they some sort of experimental life form, or were they a corruption of the technology at the time? Or were they just representations of it? We'll get to all that, don't worry. Now, here's probably what you might think of with your more traditional gargoyle. You know, it's in the column, in the pillar, on the edge of it. It's protruding a little bit. But as you said, a lot of effort was being put into it. You know, we're trying to sculpt it very carefully. Yet look at the detail in this one. And isn't it intriguing how this material has endured? Now, I can assure you this particular one is original. It has not been replaced or redone. You can see that it's on an older section of structure here, although it's still holding up rather well. How old is it? A couple hundred years old? A couple thousand years old? I have no idea. Wasn't there when they did it, but it does appear to have been very old. And it's very interesting how it's integrated right into the column. How exactly would one go about doing that? Thoughts? Yeah, there you go. Martha, Elohim built it. May as well say that. Philippi, nice dog. Yeah, make sure you got a leash for it, right? Jamie, lion-headed demon. And actually interesting you say that, Jamie, because that's how they try to explain it. And I remember even having that in the official lesson plan. Gargoyles evolved. They included everything. That's how we explain all this. They started off as lions, then they became dragons, wyverns, horrifying creatures, and then we added the humanity back into them. At least that's what the official account says. Philippi says 1,017 years old. Yeah, maybe much older for all we know. So, look at that. KC933 is respecting the build on it. That's a buff demon. Yep. Try arm wrestling with that demon. Anyways, but that's what we tend to think of. Now, oddly enough, and this is a little transition point, and we're going to go on our first break here because I really want you to think about this one. This is from a TV film from the early 1970s called Gargoyle, starring Bernie Casey. You might remember him. He was a halfback wide receiver for the Los Angeles Rams way back in the day, 1960s. And then he was an actor and a poet and, you know, jack of all trades. But he portrayed a gargoyle in a television film about gargoyles with kind of the classic tradition. Now, this is also notable because this was the first makeup effort of Stan Winston. You might recall Stan Winston as the guy who was famous for doing the Terminator, the Alien series, Jurassic Park, and many, many others with these very horrific makeup effects. But I found it odd that, with a limited budget in the early 1970s, they were able to pull this off. A rather convincing look. Now, to be fair, I haven't watched the movie. Yes, there's a movie I haven't seen. It's a TV movie, so it wasn't in the video store. But looking at the plot of it, it is an interesting plot with how humans encounter these gargoyles and some of the details behind them. And why was this made into a movie and what's the reality behind it? I believe you can find it on YouTube somewhere, but there you go. Gargoyle cartoon was bad. Oh, was it? No, not the guy from Police Academy. And welcome, Maynard Threat. Thanks for joining us. Top notch gargoyle. Yeah. Sean P. Like the demon dude from Legend. Yes, Darkness, portrayed by Tim Curry. And oddly enough, this looks like an early tryout for those makeup effects, doesn't it? Jamie has a way of saying it. The film was creepy AF. Absolutely, it was. And you're right, Dallas. The Smurfs did have a Gargamel. And I have a self-prescribed Gargamel revival style with certain structures that we look at. So, and Vaughn reminds me of a leprechaun. Yeah, the dark side of it for sure. Kryptononic. Yeah, Bernie Casey was in Revenge of the Nerds. He was also in Deep Space Nine, Babylon 5. He showed up in a lot of things. Sequest, after they changed the title to 2032 and killed the show. But yeah, he showed up in a lot of places really fast. So, ooh, Marine. Yeah, it does look a lot like Blix, doesn't it? Yeah, watch the film Legend. That's a good film. When Ridley Scott churned out nothing but gold. My, how things have changed, Joe. Jay asks, what are griffins, cousins to gargoyles? We're going to get to it. And so with that, we're going to go on our first break. But prior to going on break, please be sure you hit the like button. Thank you for showing your appreciation and supporting the channel. And we'll be back in exactly 2 minutes, and we're going to go further into this gargoyle mystery that we have. So with that, see you in 2 minutes. Okay, we are back. Thank you for your patience. You see, weather affects me as well as everybody else. Anyways, so moving on, we also want to consider the concept of the grotesque, or rather, what was affiliated with these structures, and this whole story of what's actually grotesque. Why do we have grotesques on our buildings? Because it defended them. Now, here's a gargoyle from Cologne Cathedral in Germany. You know, the massive cathedral that we take a look at. And oddly enough, they are renovating this one. And what does renovation mean? I wonder how it's been changed. Look at the detail on this, though. You can actually see the teeth, nice little horn. And look at that. We can see the eyes. Unlike many of those old Roman statues, this gargoyle has eyes. Thoughts on this one? Queen Peachy Keen knockoffs. Yes, one way of putting it. So, hey, thank you, New West Reset. I appreciate that. And welcome to the new members. Billy comments plant eating teeth. Good attention to detail there, Billy. You're right. Yeah, more like horse teeth on this guy, huh? Or gal, whatever. Alien Empire, hellhounds on my trail. And Robert says the shark. Creator's life definitely looks armored. Oh, yeah. Beyond any shadow of a doubt. DC, popcorn, yellow striped smile. Oh, yes. So looking at a few more. Now, there was a TV show in the 1990s. Somebody had mentioned it, Gargoyles. And let's see, this starred, I think it was Keith David, wasn't it? Not to be confused with David Keith, or is it David Keith? It is David Keith. Yeah, David Keith voiced the lead in it. Little cartoon that was known for its rather intense storylines. Also had Jonathan Frakes, Commander Riker, voicing Xenatos in it. But yeah, I might have watched it a little bit. Very interesting series, back when they tried different things a little bit more. But, it kind of corresponded with the classical myth of what gargoyles are. They're stone at night, or they're stone during the day, but then as soon as night comes, they're living, breathing creatures with incredible supernatural capabilities. Show was on a while, but do you think there's any possibility? And yet, oddly enough, when we consider symbols, we do see some symbol overlap from what we looked at earlier with these creatures. I mean, look at what we've got going on here. Very, very interesting with these particular gargoyles, wouldn't you say? Creator's Life. I grew up with this show, 2:30 Disney afternoon. Yes, I remember when it was on Fox Anime. I'll date myself a little bit there. So, yes, Carol saying it's stoned. Absolutely. Sean asks a good question. Are they solid or hollow? Well, the ones that I've examined are solid, but those are just the particular ones I've examined. They may well be hollow, and we get the impression a lot of them are, because as you saw in the opening of this particular exploration, they do have water going through them, so they must be hollow to an extent. But what exactly is going on with this one? It looks like we've got some human qualities that are mixed with animal qualities, a classic chimera here. Or, don't get yourself stuck on the island of Dr. Moreau might be a better way of saying it. What exactly is this really representing? I mean, a cathedral for the church where there's holy humanity that's created in the image of God, and yet we have this grotesque creature here that seems to be a human animal hybrid. How exactly do you account for this? And yes, of course, these are all on what are purported to be Catholic churches. What do you make of it? I don't know. For some reason, I'm getting some almost, I don't want to lead anybody down a path here, but I'm reminded of the lizards from V when I look at this particular figure. But that's just me. Maybe that's me and my problems in life. So, Stewie. Luciferin owned buildings. That's very interesting. Howard says Nephilim. Sovereign Invisible Untraceable says G.K. Chesterton and Malcolm Muggeridge are both deeply connected with gargoyles. Chesterton deeply influenced Burgess. The Muggeridge Society named its newsletter The Gargoyle. Both were Catholic. You don't say. Well, what are the odds of that? Sounds rather bizarre. As many things do. Yeah. Pincho Alfie asks, can these gargoyles once be alive and then turned into stone? Strong possibilities on that one. And many other possibilities with that as well. They could well have been. Or maybe there's something even more insidious behind them and what their nature actually is. Here's another image from that TV movie, and you can get an idea of the makeup. And yeah, whoever called out the Blix reference from Legend, which came out over 10 years later after this TV movie, yeah, a lot of the makeup effects were actually originally applied here. So interesting little comparison. And yeah, if you can find it, I can strongly recommend it. Now, here you have one of the earlier gargoyles, or what would be considered a gargoyle from classical architecture, Roman Greco. It's always a lion. Yeah, it's always a lion. This looks like a rather scared lion. I don't know, maybe it's just the eyes, but usually expect to see something terrifying from a lion. So interesting to note, we have the classic symbols that we associate with, the fourth era civilization, what we call Tartaria on the channel, the lions, the griffins, the eagles. And yet the official historical account and what we actually see in the structures is they start to change. They start to become darker. They start to become more hybrid, if you will, more chimera. Is that representing something? What are your thoughts on that? Jamie, it looks like a Cheshire cat. Yeah, it does have that Cheshire cat look, doesn't it? Ah. Vaughn says maybe forms of alchemy. It does give that impression, doesn't it? And Marv says it's also remnants of the Nephilim. That could well be too. Very, very true. Michael, Rick Moranis in Ghostbusters. Oh, yes, when he turned into a dog. Or the Terror Hound, as they called them. Yeah, much more interesting name. Yet another film that got remade, more or less. But then looking at some of the other ones, like here again, you have this almost human jester nature that goes into this. I mean, here you have what you might think of as classic large birds, and yet they have human qualities in them to an extent. So you're really seeing the mix of the different kind of species in one creature. So really a chimera, although they'd never call them that. They just say, oh, they're gargoyles. They're just water spouts, or they're grotesques. They're just horrifying mythical creatures they decided to park on churches to scare away evil spirits. That's all there is to it. Yeah, it's very, very fascinating that the church would tolerate, encourage, and fund that. Of course, who did they actually find to build it? You know the explanation. There's master craftsmen to be found everywhere, especially in Middle Ages Europe. When there's lots of food, there's no problem with diseases, and war is not a constant issue, right? Ah, yes. Here's one of the more classic examples where you can see that somebody put a lot of effort into constructing this gargoyle. Now, this is one I would suspect has to be rather solid, and if there is actually a hollow portion, it's really just the tube where the water runs through it. But probably think of it more as a fountain. Thoughts on this particular one? BRJ, totally cozy. Yeah. Shawnee makes a good comment there. Shawnee B, very detailed pretend creatures. Yes, isn't it always? Sky Sage says Wizard of Oz. Yes, beyond any shadow of a doubt. And yet here, when you look at some of these, and here you can see that this is a very genuine one. You can see that they put a lot of effort into this, though. I mean, look at the symmetrical precision here with the wings. And yet, once again, what would we associate this creature? For one, what kind of creature is this? It's just a gargoyle. But really, look at it directly. What kind of creature is this? What does it remind you of? Why is someone putting it on the side of a church? Sloan, yeah, alien. That's one way of putting it. Oh, this is interesting. One Arabian lady suggested these are the shapes of the souls of some demons. That is a very interesting perspective. Kind of reminds me of, I'm trying to remember the book that I read. It was by Fred Saberhagen, I believe. It was the Complete Book of Swords series. Yes, where you had demons that were actually the remnants of previous era technology. New West Reset. Winged dogs, wolves, lions seem to be common themes. Very much so. And we certainly see them all over our explorations, don't we, New West Reset? Anywhere and everywhere, even the little opera house that I come across in Clear Lake, Iowa, little small town. There are gargoyles on it, because why not? We'll get to some of those in a second. Yes, this is probably one of my favorite ones, because here you're really embracing the demonic mentality with the gargoyle. Now, what does this remind you of? I'm not going to say it. This reminds me of something very distinctive. Let's see if somebody catches it in the comments because, oh, there you go. Ubukan, Wonder Dog. Oh, that's good. Steven, demons vomiting the waters of heaven. All fitting. New West Reset. Yes, I see lions everywhere here in my local explorations. Yeah, as though we just couldn't get enough lions, right? I think Anne summarizes it very well. What the hell? Kathy, yes, it's definitely a donkey. There's donkey ears in that, no doubt about it. Red, Goat Man. KC933 looks like the bad guy from Author in the Invisibles. Oh, yes. I forgot about that one too. Anna, Jar Jar, Jar Jar Binks. Apparently, he was supposed to be the bad guy, but nobody took him seriously. Can you imagine that? Cozy, Ghostbusters. Gargoyles are possessed by the demonic spirits of Zool and Vince Clortho. Yeah, that's just as good of explanation as any other. I am Kairos, Jar Jar Goyle. Yeah, maybe we just needed to let Jar Jar be the bad guy in the prequels. They would have been even better, right? Funny how things change. Oh, there we go. There we go. Brian got it. Skeksis. Yes, and indeed, when you look up the design of the Skeksis, it's stated that they were inspired a little bit by the Gargoyles from the film The Dark Crystal. Yeah, I guess you could reference The Dark Crystal, The Age of Resistance, but I prefer the original film. You know, nothing against the new TV series. They did a good job, but I just prefer the film. That's just me. Okay, and now we go to Flagstaff, Arizona at the Blessed Virgin Mary Chapel, where they have their gargoyles that they call chimeras. Oh, yes, so this is in Flagstaff, Arizona. Aren't these some interesting little doozies? A lot of detail behind these. I haven't quite seen something like this. And here you have a little bit more of the amalgamation of what you might consider the dragon, the serpent dragon, or the great worms from Tolkien's work. But very interesting creatures. Yeah, I need to get back to Flagstaff. Yeah, Jamie calls it like he sees it. Dragons and dragons many. Ishko asks, if these were actually churches or temples of God, what role would all these creatures really play so the clergy would approve? Can you imagine the Pope looking at one? I like this one. No, I really can't. In fact, I can't imagine any priest that I've known looking at one and saying, you know, I really like this. This really shows the spiritual progression of the church. But, you know, that's just me. Maybe I'm way off. You know, we're informed that things change and so forth. Ah, Battlestar. Been there and saw that. So there you go. Someone who's actually seen it in reality. It does really exist. It's not just an image. Hmm. Ah, Robert, my high school had gargoyles. Robert, your high school had everything. I think your high school, you know, could be designated a primary old world building, but that's just me. I mean, really, you have everything there. Chimeras, all kinds of wonderful old construction material. Robert's high school is just incredible. I can never get enough of it. And that's saying something, you know, because you see all the things I look at every day. Nana says dragons and flying serpents were throne guardians. Can explain why they're on churches. That's actually a good call out. And oddly enough, and okay, I tend not to do this, but I'm going to. If anybody went and saw Gladiator 2, they did. You might have noticed what they had on the twin emperors' thrones there. And no, they weren't gargoyles. Something else we've explored. Oh, they were holding temples. Ah, very interesting. Now, here you have this older image, and here again, you see a little bit of the combination almost of different figures. Now, these down here would be what you'd be considered your traditional gargoyles, but these would just be considered figures, and yet they're all together on this structure. So almost dragon-like creatures here, strangely enough, than a dragon-like creature with wings. Could it be a griffin? Well, we had griffins on the side of thrones of Roman emperors, apparently, at least if I go with Ridley Scott's version of history. By the way, this may surprise you. I was a huge fan of the original Gladiator movie. Just thought I'd mention that, but that's why I try not to let it bias me with the sequel. But no, I did not have a good time watching the sequel. But that's just me. You know, if you enjoyed it, that's fine. That's fine. But yeah, all these what we would think of as royalty figures up here. And then, of course, the little cherubs that are nearby, which is really odd. And then we have gargoyles mixed in. What the heck to make of this? Hmm. I am Kairos, hyena style. That's a good call out there. Yeah, dragons and reptilians. Luna says some of them kind of like Falcor in Neverending Story. Oh, you know what? That's a good one, Luna. I forgot about old Falcor. When you need a luck dragon. The Neverending Story. It always kills me when Artax sinks in the sand. That's one of the hardest things for me to watch. I can see a lot of things in movies, but when poor old Artax goes down, that really gets me. What's our real story? Looks like the cherubs are hiding and the gargoyles are looking for them. Oh, that's an interesting detail there. And you'll get all kinds of little stories looking like that. Lardini says all the gargoyles on the oldest church in the Americas were removed, Santo Domingo. And tiled over the old graves that had skulls and crossbones on them. Yeah, that sounds like something that would be done in the quote-unquote New World, doesn't it? But it's intriguing when you look at these different images. All right, let's go to our next section here. So what do these gargoyles really represent? What was actually going on with this? Was this representing a dark time in Tartaria? Now, what do I mean by that? Was it really the time when they realized that their civilization was on a much shorter timeline than they realized? Or could they sense that their own end was coming? Is that the reason why we see these quote-unquote grotesque images or these gargoyles? Or, like I always say, is the mainstream correct? I just love saying that because it really just flicks certain people in the eye because I don't take possibilities off the table. You can never take a possibility off the table. You know why? We don't know the nature of reality. I've not been in a position where I know the nature of reality. So I am not going to give you a false answer. And that's what I'd be doing if I said, yes, I know who built these gargoyles and why. And that's why I'm not going to say that. And unless I build a time machine and go back in time and verify it for you, I'm not ever going to say that because it's disingenuous and that's misleading you. And I refuse to do that. Anyways, thoughts on how the transition of what we see in these buildings, why they started going with these grotesque figures. What do you think? Sean P says it has no incentive to tell the truth if it's covering it up. Yeah, and I agree, Sean. It's not correct. But I always keep it on the table. Opie, it's the human quest. Very true. The human quest for knowledge. Robert says it right there. The corruption of civilization. Lardini, our real story is being created. The past is expanding. It is, isn't it? It's expanding a lot. I mean, I always thought it was, but it does seem to be expanding, doesn't it? Brian, if art depicts life, then could they be depicting a time when angels and demons came down from above? Maybe. Or maybe what they were actually experiencing at that time when things started to really become corrupt and they could see it all around them and they were aware of it. Luna says maybe it was after they realized they'd been infiltrated and this was a defensive tactic in some way. Oh, look at Luna thinking there. Very, very true. And that maybe all these figures were a warning in terms of what could happen to humans, to people who lived in this civilization. You'll be corrupted from the inside. And here is a visual representation of what will happen to you because we're all visual learners. Great, great comment there, Luna. Sean, I spent so much time exploring the narratives they give us. It's farcical what we all believed all this time. Yeah, it tends to be when you start to really unpack it too, doesn't it? But I'm going to be honest, I never get untired of unpacking it. So what can I say? Michael, ding. New West Reset, subtleties in the architecture that help to reinforce the phony narrative and timeline. Maybe. But you know what's interesting, my friend, is that it seems like we see these things everywhere you and I look. And yet there's this same issue with the timeline. There's really no way to actually reconcile it with the timeline that we've been given. So, we stop. We have to theorize our own timeline for it to even make sense. Ooh, Robert, an agreement with the demonic. Corrupted leaders doing anything they could to preserve their civilization. That's entirely possible too. Very, very possible. Now, here are some of the, we see a little bit more of the symbolism here that we've seen before, almost like some borderline cartouches here. But then again, you see more of the, dare I say, corrupted figures, and you're starting to see it. You go from the griffins, the eagles, the lions to these more corrupted figures. And it really shows, doesn't it? Yeah, wherever you look, there's always missing time. Hard not to see it, isn't it? Yeah. Episode 65, real demonic. No doubt about it. Warning, or, were they really becoming corrupted themselves and they were showing this? Well, when you see figures like this here in Paris, yeah. And oddly enough, we do see this symbolism in more subtle ways. If you recall the exploration of the Iowa State Capitol with the figures that we have that are in the banister there on the grand stairway. Very, very interesting in and of itself, isn't it? And give me 1 second. But I've always wondered about that. And I've always wondered, why do they put that in such plain sight? Ah, turned in an instant. Yeah, maybe, Mac, maybe. Marine, seraphim, serpent, dragon creatures. And there's so many of them everywhere we look. Yeah, what's our real story? Those lizard things. And you will see them, especially if you pay attention. They're almost as common as the griffin, and that's probably the most disturbing thing. God's cat, symbolism possibly. Look up too. If you notice, the Adamic race was created in Genesis 2 after the 7 days where God created man and woman on the sixth day. Isn't it interesting too that corresponds with 7 days? Do numbers have any meaning or don't they? I'm not really sure. Oh, CJ. Leviathan. Yes. The actual Leviathan. Symbol we see a lot. Clara, here in Germany, it is common to have a gargoyle in front of the house in my street. At least 5 families have one standing in their door. Yeah, isn't that interesting how that's so prevalent, along with the lions and things that we see? That's the same thing in the States, too. In the areas that they say were settled by Germans, ironically enough. Now, here's another bit of an overkill one for you. So just multiple figures here in rows. Am I really to believe this is all just for water spouts? Well, sure, they're all hanging out, and then the water will fall on the other spouts below. It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Yes, yes. And you'll see all kind of figures when you look here. And here's where you really see the transformation in these figures. Some of these figures are more human. Some of them are more chimeric in appearance, more of an actual hybrid. Very disturbing, isn't it? Sean, does it assist birds somehow? Well, maybe, but who was really concerning themselves with birds in the Middle Ages? I mean, maybe. I can't discount it. I don't know. Anne Wise, early meeting of the Senate. Oh, that's a good one. And Vaughn, I get that feeling. Yeah, you do get the feeling of being very disturbed when you look at some of these things a little bit more closely. Michael, now that's a nice collection. Oh, yeah. Now, really, it's when you look at a structure like this and you see all these images displayed in this way, this is where I get the feeling that I think there was some sort of defensive reaction that Luna had commented on earlier, where they're really trying to warn their people in a way that, look, this is what can happen to you. You can be corrupted from the inside. And for all we know, it might have been a physical corruption as well. If your spirit, if you believe in that, or if your energy, your soul, whatever you want to call it, is corrupted in the past, the technology existed to where your physical body was corrupted as well. Because there are a lot of allusions to that. And that's also something else that's shared by multiple religions and societal and cultural beliefs across the land, that people can become corrupted. And it's one of the, well, it's actually some examples of the worst historical art and the most frightening historical art you can look at from the Middle Ages, where you see people transforming into horrifying creatures and beasts. Now, typically what you'll be told is, no, this is merely a depiction of hell, and you're looking at demons and yada blah blah. It's not actually humans. But when you look at the original works, you tend to see this, and you actually see it right here on the flipping building. People are transforming. How else am I supposed to interpret this? Well, we just parked some people with demons and creatures because we thought it'd look cool. And, the Pope approved of it, right? Yeah, Opie says it really well right there. Possession. Classic possession. I am Kairos. I would hate it if the modern surveillance cameras were made to resemble gargoyles. Well, watch out, my friend. You might have just given them an idea. Hey, Julia. That's all right. It's been one of those weeks. So I'm just amazed we've got as many people here as we do. And I appreciate everyone being here. And thanks for joining us. So, hey, Smooth Landing. Hey, it's all good. Appreciate you being here. So, anyway, I think that's why it represents that time, and then you have these figures everywhere. We've looked at figures like this in Des Moines, Iowa, in the middle of the United States, where you have these very oppressed looking human beings. And so, is this another part of that warning? Is this why you're really seeing it? The official account tells us they got back to putting humans on buildings, but in reality, they were always there. And they represented the first phase in what you might consider the corruption, the possession, however you want to say it, however you want to think of it. I can't discount anything. But you see a lot of this. You see a lot of examples. And again, it's very, very hard to ignore. And then you see the extreme versions of it. Now, of course, this is what you'll be associated with Gothic architecture. But here's where I think you see the really terrifying creatures, how far it goes. The final transformation, if you will. Now, just think on that because of what we've looked at with the final conflict that Tartaria was involved in, the Fourth Era civilization. An initial conflict they were victorious in, and a second conflict where they were infiltrated and ultimately defeated. And there's also the reality that no, not everything was all hunky-dory. I've never suggested or believed that the old world was a quote-unquote utopian civilization. I believe it had a lot more balance at one point in time, but it was never a utopian civilization. And certainly the darkest aspects of it are probably and more likely worse than anything we've experienced or have thought of we've experienced in our current existence. That's just my perception. I could be completely wrong. Little theory I'm sharing out there. Sod the Sloth from Ice Age. Jamie Griffin, muties. Yes. There's a term I haven't seen for a while. And that takes us to the final section, a warning to the future. What if something else that the Fourth Era civilization was trying to do was to communicate to future generations that these gargoyles, they knew something of their civilization would remain, and they wanted to communicate what the dangers could be. They wanted to communicate in any way they could what had happened in the past. And for whatever reason, we do have certain old world structures that endure, that don't seem to be torn down. Yes, many of them are renovated, but yet if there was a way that you could communicate to give a warning to future generations about the worst things that could happen, would this be a way to do it? Again, it's a theory, but I don't wonder if it happens to fit the facts. Here we have another very well-built gargoyle. That's what you want to call it. But what the heck is going on with this creature? I mean, here you see all the worst details that we've seen in others. Kathy. Yeah, it does look like the Mothman, doesn't it? Stewie, don't think this was warning. Well, maybe not. It's just my theory. I am Kairos. Maybe a reminder of their return. Yeah, so this follows on the ancient enemy pretty well then, doesn't it? What's our real story? Some of these really look like creatures that have been Medusa'd. Yeah, the old Medusa effect. And then Vaughn, Terracotta Warriors give off the same vibe. There's one of those things, if you actually go to that location in person, that's a very high energy location, I will say. Ishko, every wise man in history has warned society about the same things, and yet society goes and degrades each and every time. Therefore, so many resets across eternity. Yes, apparently so. Creator's Life, Fallen Fiery One. Yeah. Jamie, those wings look like they're designed for gliding. Yeah, a little bit more of a delta configuration on them, wouldn't you say? Not necessarily, just a little bit more of a gliding configuration. Good call out there. And then you have more of these other elaborate creatures. Is this representing some kind of dragon? Is it representing some kind of mix between a dragon and some other sort of mythical creature? At least what we'll be told. Not really sure, but very, very intriguing, isn't it? Ah, Vaughn, predators. Yes, I could definitely see that. Oh, KC933. It's a dinosaur. Hey, KC, tell me what's the difference between a dinosaur and a dragon? Maybe someday we'll figure that out, right? Oh, Phoenix Rising. Naga. Good call out there. Dead sheep. Are you the keymaster? Yes, he's a good friend of mine. He called me and told me to come here for you. All right, we'll move on from this horrific image. And then you see some of the more disturbing human images with strange facial expressions. For whatever reason, this one kind of reminds me of that alien encounter film from a couple years back with Mila Jovovich, Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind in Nome, Alaska. Interesting film. And then a little bit more of the classic gargoyle. Now, this one, we've looked at this before. And yet, this is from the Plummer Building in Rochester, Minnesota. So, the original building of the Mayo Clinic, which is known for just being covered in griffins, actual griffins. But it also has gargoyles on it too. And yet these gargoyles have a little bit more of the eagle look to them, except for this one where you see a little bit more of the, maybe I'd say the dragon look. But then on the top, you also have what looks to be the very advanced humans. Whoops. So very, very interesting. All in the Plummer Building, all in Rochester, Minnesota. Not one of the great large cities, a city that is the Mayo Clinic and everything that's built around it. And if you're lucky, you might see Michael York there, but don't count on it. Crab aliens. Yeah. Jamie, yes, this is the one with the big owls. Money B, hybrids from the Nephilim era. For some reason, I'm under the impression that whatever we're seeing on this building is from a different time and survived for whatever reason. It was before that warning or before things were corrupted, whatever actually happened. So, lyrical reaction. Imagine these on your building instead of pigeons. Mr. Wynn, it's all so inspirational to me. These are very inspirational designs. Let's go to the next one. So here's a little bit of a closer look at those figures. And yes, this building has all kinds of unique figures and symbols on it, on the exterior and the interior. I mean, here we've got a classic eagle right down to the eye. Now, officially, this building was thrown up in the 1920s, again in Rochester, Minnesota. So, not a large city, and it's holding up quite well. And they have the same symbols in it. So, another one of those smoking guns, if you will. And then we have more of our terrifying figure here. Now, I can see this actually being a water spout, but again, why do you need this horrifying figure as a water spout? Just happens to be a tongue, too. Is it sticking its tongue out at you? Jamie, he's from the Muppets. Yeah, I agree, W. There's a creepy vibe to a lot of them. God's Cats, pre-Art Deco. Maybe. Who really knows for sure, though, on that count, right? And then the final image of gargoyles. Here you see that little bit of corruption where you see the animalistic, reptilian, and dare I even say a primate look to them. But there is something very demonic about these particular ones, especially when you look at them from the back. So, were they real creatures? Were they what people were being transformed into back in time? Were they turned into stone? Not sure. Don't know, but they do have some disturbing qualities to them, don't they? Yeah, Julia Skeksis from Dark Crystal, no doubt about it. Ooh, share fortunes, channeling dark forces for electric power. I wonder. Yeah, Sky Sage says it well. There is something very frightening about the lifelike quality to them. So whoever built them or however they got there, that effect seems to have been very clearly achieved. Sid Vintage Petrified. New Westry said, imagine what went on in the mind of those who made these. That's why I really wonder. I mean, if you're actually carving this, how would you go about doing it? That's the real question. You know, I'll ask that other question again. Could somebody build these today? I'm not really sure. Maybe. Michael, one's about to eat that skyscraper. Yeah, perspective's a nice thing, isn't it? Ooh. It's Krampus, says Morpheus Pill. And thank you for that. Yeah, it definitely is Krampus, isn't it? Quite a nice call out there. See if I've got any more. Oh, yes. Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland. Yeah, they could do some nifty gargoyles in Scotland, too. Now, is this a bit of the lion creature, or is this something else? I'm not sure. Quite a ghoulish creature, though, isn't it? One of those old chapels that they had from back in the day. And here is what you'll probably see when you think of the most terrifying depiction of gargoyles. So thoughts overall on what these symbols may represent. You know, was it a warning? Was it a way to defend against an encroaching, corrupting evil influence? Was it something else entirely? Or did somebody really have a desire to have this kind of art on buildings? Michael. Yeah, these are the nasty ones, says Jamie. Michael says they're more Asian in appearance, Oriental. I don't know. Granola Grin, Gremlins with Wings. Yeah, I could see that. Vaughn says it really well right there. Fear. And Mary reminds me of Azazel. Oh, yeah, that was a really good movie with Denzel Washington, wasn't it? I forgot about that one. Just like Lord of the Rings, says Sheriff Fortune. So, and Battlestar Utarian, so exact. As though there was nothing they couldn't do back in that time. Anyway, so that's our exploration there on gargoyles and the symbols of Tartaria, part 3. I hope you enjoyed it. Ishko. I like these better. Modern gargoyles suck. Yeah, where we're looking to the alien films for inspiration, right? We need to hire old HR to make some more, don't we? Oh, Anne says it very well there. Metamorphosis of society into something nefarious. I think whatever happened and however it happened, that's probably the closest thing we could derive to a fact from it. Ooh, cozy. What's that? Some legends say that gargoyles can communicate with others when wind or rain passes through their mouths. I wonder why. Yeah, Robert molded beyond any shadow of a doubt. Well, anyways, I hope you enjoyed this exploration and you are doing well wherever you are. We will be returning next weekend for another exploration, and we've got some more coming up this week. So I hope you all have a wonderful time wherever you are in the land, and thank you for joining us. And before you go, don't forget to hit that like button and appreciate your support. And if you didn't get around to commenting in the live stream, please comment in the comment section after. And we'll see you soon. This is Lucius Aurelian signing off.